No one expects to make a life or death decision in the middle of a paperwork line, but that's exactly what happened to Nurse Rachel Turner on a Friday night at Crest View General Hospital. It was nearly midnight when the emergency room doors burst open and a man staggered in his shirt soaked with blood, his face pale with shock. Jack Harmon, a 45-year-old man injured in a motorcycle crash, had somehow driven himself to the hospital despite a deep arterial wound in his left arm. He didn't have the luxury of time. He needed help, not a clipboard. Rachel, a 32-year-old senior triage nurse, known for her calm under pressure, moved without hesitation. The moment she saw the blood trailing across the floor and the dazed look in Jack's eyes, she knew he was crashing. But as she reached to assist him, her supervisor Janet Walsh stepped in sharply. "He needs to register first," she said, citing the hospital's strict policy requiring intake paperwork and insurance verification before treatment could begin. Rachel didn't budge. "He's bleeding out," she said flatly, already moving around the desk. She wrapped her arm around Jack to support his failing steps and guided him straight into Trauma Bay 3. She applied pressure to the wound, called for a trauma team, and calmly asked his name. Jack Harmon, he muttered. She nodded, already assessing his vitals and barking out the information to the on-call doctor. Every second mattered. Dr. Patel, the attending physician, arrived moments later and quickly confirmed Rachel's judgment. "Good catch, Rachel," he said, prepping Jack for emergency surgery. 5 more minutes and he wouldn't be here. But even as she focused on stabilizing the patient, Rachel knew she had just crossed the line, her third strike against the hospital's no-exception policy. As Jack was wheeled away to the operating room, he grabbed Rachel's hand and whispered, "You saved my life." "Thank you." She gave a reassuring smile. "Just focus on healing. That's thanks enough." But in her heart, Rachel knew the real cost of doing the right thing might come soon. Janet was already on the phone, and security had begun quietly gathering near the trauma bay. Rachel Turner had made her choice. She had broken the rules, but she had saved a man's life. And deep down, she knew no protocol was worth more than that. Rachel Turner didn't sleep the night after she saved Jack Harmon's life. While he was in surgery, she stayed close to the trauma unit waiting for any updates. She knew what she'd done violated hospital policy for the 3rd time, but she also knew what would have happened if she hadn't acted. Jack would have bled out on the emergency room floor while someone asked for his insurance card. To her, it wasn't a difficult decision. It was the only decision a nurse could make with a conscience. The following morning, Rachel was summoned to the hospital administrator's office. She walked in still wearing the same blood-stained scrubs from the night before. Sitting behind the desk was Robert Chen, Crest View General's chief administrator, flanked by her supervisor, Janet Walsh. Janet had a thick folder open on the table. Rachel could see her name on the tab. She knew this wasn't a warning. It was a reckoning. "Ms. Turner." Chen began coldly, "You've been called here regarding a serious violation of hospital protocol. This is your 3rd documented breach." Rachel stood tall, refusing to apologize for doing her job. That patient was hemorrhaging from a severed artery. If I had waited for intake paperwork, he would have died. Chen's tone remained clinical. "That is not your decision to make. Protocol exists to protect the hospital from liability from chaos and from uninformed decision-making. You are not authorized to override it." Rachel glanced toward Janet, who looked both smug and slightly nervous. "So paperwork takes precedence over saving a life now?" Rachel asked, her voice tight but measured. "You were warned twice before," Janet said sharply. "Your personal judgment does not outweigh the hospital's legal obligations." Despite their words, Rachel could see the discomfort behind Chen's eyes. He was towing a line, repeating what the legal team likely advised, but that didn't make the outcome any less devastating. "Effective immediately," Chen announced, "your employment with Crest View General Hospital is terminated." Rachel didn't flinch. She stood, nodded once, and walked out of the room with the same calm she used to stop arterial bleeding. But her world was beginning to spin. She had no job, no severance, no legal defense lined up. All because she made a choice to act like a nurse instead of a bureaucrat. What she didn't yet know was that her actions had not gone unnoticed. News of her termination spread quickly through the emergency department. Within hours, the nurses' break room had become a war room. Rachel's closest colleague, Sarah Kim, immediately started collecting incident reports of similar cases where patient care had been delayed due to strict protocol enforcement. "She did what every good nurse wishes they could do," Sarah said to a growing circle of frustrated coworkers. "She put the patient first." Doctors, too, began to murmur their discontent. Dr. Patel, the attending physician who helped save Jack Harmon, submitted a formal statement to hospital leadership. Nurse Turner made the only medically appropriate decision in a critical situation. Her dismissal is not only unjust, it's dangerous. The administration tried to contain the story, but it was too late. The staff was talking. The union was alerted. And then came the moment that would change everything. Jack Harmon woke up. Still weak from surgery, Jack asked the first nurse he saw about the woman who'd saved him. When he was told she'd been fired for treating him without permission, he stared in stunned silence. Then he picked up the phone and made a call to his daughter, Captain Jessica Harmon, a decorated officer in the United States Marine Corps. Jessica was overseas at the time, but within hours, she was on a flight home. Her father's story enraged her, not just because of his near-death experience, but because the woman who had helped him was being punished for it. She didn't know who he was, Jessica would later say to the press, but she didn't need to. She saw a human being in danger and stepped up when others hesitated. That's a hero in my book. As Rachel sat at home trying to decide what to do next, her phone buzzed again and again with messages of support from fellow nurses and even former patients. Though she had been terminated, she was far from alone. What began as a quiet act of defiance in one hospital trauma bay was now becoming something bigger, something louder. Rachel Turner hadn't just broken protocol. She had sparked a movement, and the hospital that fired her was about to face a storm it never expected. Rachel Turner sat at her small kitchen table surrounded by silence. Her phone buzzed endlessly, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. The reality of her termination had settled in like a storm cloud, thick, heavy, and suffocating. Despite saving a man's life, she had been fired. Her career, 8 years of grueling nights, compassion, and sacrifice, had been stripped away for doing what she believed was right. She had no idea that beyond her quiet apartment walls, a wave of support was already building, led by someone whose life she had unknowingly changed forever. Jack Harmon had survived his emergency surgery, stabilized in the ICU, and was recovering steadily. But when he learned that the nurse who had acted so quickly to save his life had been fired for breaking hospital protocol, his reaction was swift and visceral. "That woman saved my life," he said, gripping the bed rails with trembling hands, and they punished her for it. He demanded his phone and made a call, one that would ignite a chain of events no hospital administrator could have anticipated. Captain Jessica Harmon, Jack's daughter, was stationed overseas when she got the call, a decorated officer in the United States Marine Corps. Jessica had served multiple tours and was known for her calm under fire. But nothing prepared her for the rage she felt upon hearing what had happened to her father and to the nurse who saved him. By the time she landed back in San Diego 24 hours later, she had already mobilized dozens of fellow Marines and reached out to veteran networks across the country. The following afternoon, as hospital staff tried to go about business as usual, the air inside Crest View General suddenly shifted. First, 2 Marines in dress blues appeared in the lobby, then 4, then 10. By the top of the hour, over 30 Marines stood silently shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall of solemn resolve just inside the front entrance. They didn't shout. They didn't protest. They simply stood polished and proud, sending a message that needed no words. You do not dishonor those who save our own. Captain Jessica Harmon arrived shortly after, flanked by senior officers and Marine veterans from all branches. She stepped forward and addressed the stunned reception desk with calm authority. "We're here to honor Nurse Rachel Turner," she said, her voice ringing across the polished tile floor. "She exemplified the values we hold sacred: courage, honor, and selfless service. And we will not stand silently while she is punished for doing what was right." Within minutes, the lobby was filled with more than Marines. Local veterans arrived in uniform, some in wheelchairs, others with canes and service dogs. Family members, hospital staff, and even patients trickled in, drawn by the sight. The press followed soon after. Camera crews swarmed the front doors, capturing the rare and powerful image of Marines in full dress, standing at attention inside a civilian hospital, not in protest, but in defense of principle. Rachel, watching it unfold on her television screen at home, felt overwhelmed. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had never asked for this. All she had done was help a man who was dying. But the message was clear now. She hadn't just saved Jack Harmon. She had inspired something far greater. Back at the hospital, the administration was scrambling. Robert Chen, the same administrator who had fired Rachel, watched the scene from his office window. His attempts to contain the situation with internal memos and brief statements had failed. The story had exploded across social media, picked up by local news, and was now trending nationally. Hero nurse fired for saving veteran, the headlines read. It wasn't just about hospital policy anymore. It was about values, about ethics, about what the public believed healthcare should stand for. Then came another blow to the administration. Congressman Michael Torres, a Marine veteran and member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, arrived unannounced. He didn't stop at the front desk. He walked straight through the Marines, greeted Captain Harmon with a firm handshake, and then turned to the press. Nurse Rachel Turner is exactly the kind of healthcare professional we need in this country, he said, someone who puts human life before bureaucracy. The crowd in the lobby erupted in applause. Inside, hospital board members began convening an emergency meeting. Staff members, including nurses from other departments, had begun to call in sick in quiet protest. Administrators were flooded with calls and emails from veterans groups, military families, and outraged citizens. Rachel Turner had become more than a nurse. She had become a symbol of something the hospital could no longer ignore. Outside, in front of the growing crowd, Captain Jessica Harmon took the microphone once more. Rachel Turner didn't ask who my father was. She didn't care about his status. She saw a man bleeding and made a choice to save him. That is what service looks like, and we will not rest until she is reinstated with full honor. As the cameras flashed and the Marines stood silently behind her, one thing was certain. The fight for Rachel Turner's reinstatement had become a national movement. And this time, the hospital wasn't in control of the narrative. The people were. The hospital boardroom had never been so full, nor so tense. As protesters gathered outside and Marines continued their silent vigil in the hospital lobby, Crest View General's board of directors met in emergency session. The national backlash had reached a boiling point. News networks across the country were airing segments on Rachel Turner, the nurse who broke the rules to save a Marine veteran's life and was fired for it. Letters poured in from medical professionals, patient rights organizations, and lawmakers. And now, a former Navy surgeon, Dr. Patricia Williams, who chaired the hospital's board, found herself at the center of a crisis that was shaking the very foundation of their institution. Dr. Williams called the room to order, her voice firm but calm. A decorated veteran herself, she understood both the rigid necessity of protocols and the undeniable weight of moral judgment in the moment. We have to face the reality of where we are, she began. Our reputation is in free fall. Major donors are threatening to withdraw. Patients are canceling appointments. Staff morale is crumbling. But more importantly, we've punished someone for saving a life. Meanwhile, down in the hospital lobby, the crowd had grown. Marines stood at attention while veterans of all ages joined them, some holding signs that read, "Compassion over protocol," and "Rachel Turner saved a life." Now let's save her job. Press cameras captured every angle. Congressman Michael Torres was giving a live interview outside, demanding answers. And inside her apartment, Rachel watched with a strange mix of disbelief and humility. She hadn't asked for a movement, but now one had her name on it. Back in the boardroom, Dr. Williams continued. I've reviewed the medical documentation, the timeline, and the eyewitness accounts. Nurse Turner made the correct clinical decision. Her patient was in critical condition and required immediate intervention. What she did wasn't just reasonable, it was heroic. There was a brief silence around the table before murmurs of agreement followed. A few board members tried to raise concerns about precedent and liability, but they were quickly overruled. What's more dangerous, Dr. Williams countered, is creating a culture where nurses are afraid to act in emergencies because of fear of punishment. The vote was unanimous. 2 hours later, as the media and crowd continued to hold vigil outside the hospital, Dr. Williams and Administrator Robert Chen walked into the main lobby, now standing room only. Rachel had been invited back and stood surrounded by Marines, fellow nurses, and members of the public who had come to support her. Jessica Harmon stood beside her in full dress uniform, arms crossed, expression fierce. Dr. Williams stepped up to the microphones, set up for the press. We've called this conference to publicly address the matter of Nurse Rachel Turner, she said, her voice unwavering. After a thorough review, the board of directors has unanimously voted to reinstate Nurse Turner to her position at Crest View General Hospital, effective immediately. The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time in days, Rachel felt her breath return. But Dr. Williams wasn't finished. In addition, she continued, Ms. Turner will be promoted to the role of nursing supervisor in recognition of her outstanding judgment, her commitment to patient care, and her courage under pressure. Gasps swept the room. Cameras flashed. Rachel blinked, stunned. She hadn't expected a promotion, only fairness. Dr. Williams paused again, allowing the moment to settle before delivering the final blow to the hospital's old system. Effective immediately, we are suspending the current patient processing protocol. A task force will be created to draft a new policy, one that puts patient safety first, while maintaining appropriate administrative standards. This will include representatives from our nursing staff, physicians, and patient advocates. We are not just fixing a wrong, we are building a better future. The reaction was instant. Marines straightened in respect. Nurses clapped, some with tears streaming down their cheeks. Jessica Harmon stepped forward and embraced Rachel as the crowd surged with cheers. Rachel took the microphone briefly. Her voice trembled but held steady. This isn't just a win for me. It's a win for every nurse who's ever had to choose between their training and a policy. It's a reminder that doing the right thing should never cost you your job, and that in medicine, people must always come before paperwork. What had started as a quiet act of defiance had grown into a national conversation, and now into real institutional change. Rachel Turner wasn't just back at work. She had changed how her hospital and possibly many others would approach emergency care from that day forward. 5 years after she was fired for saving a man's life, Rachel Turner stood once again in the very trauma bay where it all began. But this time, not as a nurse under fire, but as chief nursing officer of Crest View General Hospital. The room had been renamed the Jack Harmon Emergency Treatment Center, honoring the Marine veteran whose near-death experience had changed everything. What started as one woman's decision to break protocol for the sake of a bleeding stranger had grown into a nationwide movement, one that reshaped the culture of healthcare from the inside out. Rachel's story became a national case study in nursing schools and healthcare policy circles. Her courage sparked federal legislation protecting medical professionals who act in good faith during emergencies. A foundation bearing her name now funds scholarships for future nurses who vow to put patients first. And across hospitals nationwide, the once rigid walls of bureaucracy have started to shift slowly but meaningfully toward a model of compassion-led care. Rachel never sought fame. She simply followed the instincts that had guided her through every shift, every late night, every decision she made with a stethoscope in hand and a patient before her. But her courage proved that one voice, one act of defiance, can create lasting change, especially when it's rooted in compassion. And maybe that's the lesson we all need to hear today. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. At first. But when you lead with courage, others follow. When you choose compassion over compliance, the world notices. If this story moved you, let us know what it meant to you in the comments. What does courage look like in your life? Share your thoughts, and if you believe in honoring those who put people before policy. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire real change and remind us all what truly matters.